All right, y'all, as promised, it is 2 after the hour, wherever you are in the country. And I love seeing all the greetings coming in the chat box. We have a lot of representation today, and it is really, really exciting. I just want to go ahead and get everyone welcomed and situated for today's webinar. A big thank you for joining us today. There is certainly a lot of interest in this topic, and we're glad that you were able to join us on such short notice. For starters, my name is Kelly McDonough, and I am the Associate Director of our Education and Training team at No Kid Hungry. I'm going to get us started with just friendly reminders about webinar housekeeping. One thing is for sure, we will be recording this webinar, so you will receive access to the webinar recording along with the slide deck in a post-webinar email. To get us started, we have everyone in listen-only mode, aka you are on mute. We encourage you to engage with us via both the chat feature and the Q&A box. We welcome you to submit questions through the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we will get to those at the end of the session. If you have any technical difficulties and could benefit from support, please go ahead and use the chat box to reach out to the hosts. We have our teammate Chelsea supporting us behind the scenes, and she will help with any challenges that arise. I did want to acknowledge that we did review the many questions that were submitted via the registration process. So we definitely thank you all for going ahead and letting us know what is on your mind so that we can best prepare for today's webinar. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as we are able to today, both in the interest of time and the information that we do have available. I did want to acknowledge, and hopefully a number of you saw this with yesterday's quick change of plans, USDA is not with us today. We mutually decided that it would be best to let their team focus on developing the guidance, and they will soon offer more information in regards to implementation and specific waivers. We continue to work with USDA and national partners to provide other opportunities for you to hear directly from USDA, and hopefully more information about those opportunities will be coming soon. I did want to add as well that today is or was going to be sort of an unofficial kickoff to our back to school webinar series. So if this is one of your first webinar opportunities with No Kid Hungry, I certainly hope that you will come back for more. We'll be kicking off now and going through September, offering webinars on a variety of topics to help program operators and partners ensure successful implementation of programs as we look towards the new school year. And with that, I kind of had the easy job today, and I am going to turn things over to my teammate Carolyn, who's going to walk us through the details of the Keep Kids Fed Act. And as I do that, again, a reminder to please engage with us via the Q&A and chat functions. I will keep an eye on that. I know Carolyn is going to do a super thorough job here today, but at the end, we will go and reflect on those questions that are there. With that, Carolyn, it's all you.
All right, thank you, Kelly, and thank you again to everyone for joining us today. So to get started with our agenda for this hour, I'll start off with some context and legislative history so we all know exactly where we've been and how we got to where we are today with the Keep Kids Fed Act. Then I'll provide a summary of the Keep Kids Fed Act before talking about implications for the year ahead, and then wrapping up with some next steps. And then hopefully we will get to questions. But as Kelly already mentioned, I do just want to acknowledge all of the great questions that we've already received. We have shared those with USDA, both the questions that were submitted for the prior webinar about the upcoming school year and once we pivoted to this webinar about the Keep Kids Fed Act. So I will not be able to answer all of those questions just purely based on where we are right now. But again, we have shared those with USDA as they work on their guidance. And I do also want to specifically call out the question that we received. Why do you guys have the answers and my state agency hasn't issued guidance yet? I don't have all of the answers, like I said, and your state agency is not behind the curve. We are still waiting for USDA to put out the actual waivers and to put out guidance. And from there, state agencies will have to review that and then put out their own guidance and procedures. So this is not going to be the definitive guidance for the next year. This is just the first step. But we just really thought it was important, knowing there were a lot of questions out there about what this means, and knowing where we are right now with summer already started and school year planning already underway, that we wanted to get out there and give you some sense of what's ahead. But again, this is not the last piece of information you'll need. And we are still waiting for more, and you will hear me reiterate that many times as we go through today, but just wanted to start off again with that context. Speaking of context, let's talk about how we got to where we are today. So, as I'm sure you all know, joining this webinar, the USDA Child Nutrition Response nationwide waivers have been critical since the beginning of the pandemic in supporting safe access to meals, both in and out of school. They've also helped you to address the massive supply chain disruptions we've been facing, giving you some meal pattern flexibility. And they've also streamlined operations with some flexibility on administrative requirements, and also with waivers that have allowed things like free meals for all students, which have really simplified counting and claiming and things like that, which have provided the opportunity to do things like delivery and grab and go and meals outside and meals in the classroom and all the amazing things that you guys have been doing over these past 2+ years. And those waivers were available with authority given to USDA by Congress. I will emphasize this many times. There is a distinction between the actual waivers from USDA and the authority for USDA to grant waivers. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today with the Keep Kids Fed Act is that authority and not necessarily the actual waivers, because USDA hasn't put them out yet. But just broadly, the nationwide waivers that we've been working with over the past 2 years are above and beyond what USDA can normally do under their legal authority. But because of the pandemic, Congress gave USDA special authority starting in March of 2020, and that has been renewed several times since. And it is broad authority that allows measures that increase overall cost of the government, which normally USDA can't do, and also to change meal pattern rules, which is also something that usually USDA is strictly forbidden from changing. Well, what happened with it? So again, it's been renewed several times since March of 2020, and it was last renewed at the end of September 2021, and it was set to expire June 30th of this year, so a few days away. It's set to expire in just a few days. The last renewal at the end of September limited USDA's authority to this school year, so they were explicitly forbidden in that extension from issuing waivers to cover this summer. And, you know, I think almost as soon as the waivers were extended, we knew getting into the school year, Omicron hit, supply chains got even worse, as if that were possible. And so we just knew that this school year was not the transition back to normal operations that we had all hoped for and that we all needed. And so we did begin the process of advocating for another extension of the waivers, knowing that more flexibility was going to be needed, especially with the supply chains, what they were, especially with the unpredictability of this pandemic. But despite that advocacy, an extension of USDA's waiver authority, as it had been extended in the past, did not come as we had hoped in the mid-February short-term continuing resolution, and it was not in the mid-March omnibus appropriations bill. So those appropriations bills, spending bills, were usually the best path for extending this waiver authority in the past, and it did not happen, which was a big disappointment. And so with that, USDA still just got to work saying, okay, if this is the way it's going to be, here's the guidance we need to issue with, you know, that possibility of absolutely no waivers for the coming year. And so they issued guidance for this summer and the coming school year on options for state requested waivers under their usual pre-pandemic authority. They issued some guidance on some alternatives for determining area eligibility, knowing that some of the usual data sources weren't there, and also on calculating eligibility for severe need breakfast reimbursement and the 2-cent differential lunch reimbursement. USDA wasn't the only person taking action, though. There were still things happening in Congress, and we were still busy along with all of you, along with so many other national partners. There was a standalone bill introduced at the end of March, the Support Kids Not Red Tape Act, introduced by Senator Stabenow. It was related to an earlier bill, the Keeping School Meals Flexible Act, introduced in the House of Representatives by Representative Spanberger. The Support Kids Not Red Tape Act was widely co-sponsored, but it didn't move without a quote unquote vehicle. That's a big piece of legislation that's typically used to get laws through. However, a standalone compromise bill emerged in June, the Keep Kids Fed Act. This was negotiated among some key players in Congress, and it was bipartisan. And it passed as a standalone bill on June 24th, and it was signed into law on June 25th. And I feel like I have been telling people for the last 6 months, the Schoolhouse Rock version of how a bill becomes a law is dead. Things don't happen as standalone bills anymore. It all has to come with like an appropriations bill or something like that. And I'm happy to eat my words that Congress actually passed a standalone bill. So that is where we are, how we got to this point. That the Keep Kids Fed Act has now passed into law as its own standalone bill. So now let's dig in. What was actually in this bill that just passed? So it includes an extension of USDA's nationwide waiver authority for the Summer Food Service Program and the Seamless Summer Option through September of 2022. It also includes meal pattern waiver authority through school year 22-23 or June of 2023. It includes limited nationwide waiver authority through school year 22-23. It includes higher per meal reimbursement rates in the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, and Child and Adult Care Food Program through school year 22-23. And it includes the higher Tier 2 reimbursement rates for Tier 2 family daycare homes in the CECFP, also through June of 2023. And I will dig in on each of these in a lot more detail, but first, I want to say what's not in the Keep Kids Fed Act, because I think that's just as important in a lot of ways as what's in it. This is not a full extension of USDA's nationwide waiver authority through next June. Again, there's an extension through this summer and some separate waiver authority, but it is not the wholesale extension for another year like we've often had in the past and like we were advocating for. So the work's not done. But that is just where we are today, and we want to make sure everyone understands where we are today for planning purposes. It does not include an ability to operate the seamless summer option through next school year. So we know that's what you've all been doing, or what many of you have been doing for the past school year, and the law does not allow USDA to permit that for this coming school year. It also does not allow USDA to offer the Summer Food Service Program reimbursement rates for meals through next school year. And as you might have gathered from both of those prior things, this means it does not allow for nationwide universal free school meals through next school year. And it does not allow for the elimination of the reduced price category for school meals for the coming school year. You may have heard that was in a prior version of the bill when it was first introduced, but it did not make it into the final bill. So I know that wasn't really a thing over the past few years, and so it may be confusing that this is suddenly a thing, but not a thing now, but wanted to make sure that everyone's on the same page, that that was not in the final bill. Okay, so let's get into more specifics on what was there. So the nationwide waiver authority for this summer does allow USDA to issue new waivers and extend all nationwide waivers for the Summer Food Service Program and Seamless Summer Option through this September. That does include the area eligibility waiver, and it also includes the other waivers like non-congregate, meal service time, and parent or guardian meal pickup. But again, I want to emphasize right now what I am talking about is what Congress has authorized USDA to do. I am not talking about what USDA has already done. USDA is currently working, reviewing the law, making sure that they're in total agreement with Congress on what their authority actually does include and what they see as being needed and all of that. So again, I am talking about what Congress has authorized USDA to do. I'm not talking about what is already truly in effect and guaranteed to you. But I do want to add that based on the law, this flexibility to do all of the waivers under the nationwide authority, similar to as it has been, it does not apply to summer schools operating through NSLP. The law was pretty clear that this extension of the broad nationwide waiver authority only applied to SFSP and SSO. Likewise, that means that this broad waiver authority would not help schools that begin their school year before September 30th. So we wouldn't see an extension of, say, SSO operations after the beginning of the coming school year, even if the school year begins before September 30th. The way the law was written really does limit it to summer operations. But if somewhere there's a school year that doesn't begin until October 1st, theoretically you would be able to continue. And similarly, this broad nationwide waiver authority does not apply to CACFP. I do have those asterisks though, because there is some waiver authority that can help. It's just not this broad nationwide waiver authority that USDA has had across all of the program areas for the past 2+ years. Meal pattern waiver authority, however, was explicitly extended across the programs through next June. So this allows USDA to issue or extend meal pattern waivers for all of the programs. Now, about the waiver authority for the coming school year. USDA can issue or extend no-cost nationwide waivers that fall within their usual authority. So the nationwide part is not part of their usual authority. That was something that was explicitly granted for this next year. But in terms of the types of things they can grant waivers for, that has to fall within their usual pre-pandemic authority. This waiver authority does cover CACFP in addition to the school meals programs. And this would include the option to issue waivers for non-congregate, meal service time, and parent guardian meal pickup. Those are considered the no-cost waivers since they're essentially helping meals that would have been served otherwise. They're just being served in a different way. And then this waiver authority also includes the possibility for other administrative waivers as well that would be no cost. They would just be providing some flexibility in how the programs operate and some of, again, those like back end types of things. But along with what's not included with the usual authority, the way Congress wrote the law would not permit USDA to issue waivers that increase federal costs, that increase reimbursements for meals, or change the provision of free or reduced price meals. I have that asterisk on the reimbursements because, as I already said, the law increased reimbursement rates, but the way the law was written will not allow USDA to change the reimbursement rates beyond what was explicitly set in this law. So again, that's why we know USDA wouldn't have the authority to provide the summer food service program rates for meals served in the upcoming school year. Okay, let's get to those increased meal reimbursements though, because that's some good news in this bill. So across reimbursement levels, fee categories, and states, the law increases per meal reimbursements by 40 cents per lunch in the National School Lunch Program, 15 cents per breakfast through the School Breakfast Program, and 10 cents per meal and snack through the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And related, it also allows those Tier 2 family daycare homes participating in the CACFP to receive the higher Tier 1 rates through next June. I'll talk through a little bit more examples, especially on the school side of what this looks like. So if you're getting confused about the across reimbursement levels and fee categories piece, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is the top line: 40 cents per lunch, 15 cents per breakfast, 10 cents extra for CACFP. And just some quick additional provisions. The law confirms that waivers cannot be in effect past the expiration of USDA's authority. So that means that when USDA's authority expires at the end of next June, all of the waivers that were provided under this authority also have to end. They can't issue a waiver, on June 1 that covers us through September of 2023. And it also directs USDA to provide assistance to state agencies and schools to assist parents and school leaders with the transition to operations without waivers. So we know USDA is already working on that. We're working on that. So many other partners are already working on that, but we have it in the law that it's out there because we know it's so needed. All right, that was a really fast run through, but let's talk a little bit more about the implications and what this might really mean for your operations. I'm actually going to start with CACFP and the childcare piece, just to run through it quickly, but also partly because it's kind of separated from this summer and school year distinction. CACFP childcare, it's just running year round. So in some respects, it's a little easier to think about some things in that context. So saying it again, the Tier 2 daycare homes qualify for that Tier 1 meal reimbursement rate starting July 1 through next June. So kind of no distinction again about summer or school year. All CACFP operators will receive that 10 extra cents per meal and snack, July 1 to June 30th, no distinction about summer versus school year. And same thing from whenever waivers get issued and approved and up and running through next June, there is the potential for meal pattern flexibility, and there is the potential for waivers for non-congregate service, meal service times, parent guardian meal pickup, and other administrative requirements. What does it mean that I put potential there in bold with stars? It means USDA must still actually issue these waivers and guidance. These are not guaranteed things. I think USDA is well aware that some meal pattern flexibility is pretty necessary right now, given supply chain challenges. But again, the actual waiver hasn't come out yet, so it's still a potential. And after that, states must, again, review those waivers, review that guidance, opt into those, and determine procedures. So even though this law gets us away from that state-by-state waiver request process that we thought we had to go back to for the coming year, states do still have to opt into the waiver. So it's an easier process. Hopefully everyone feels a lot more confidence in there just being the one waiver as it is and as it's written. But states ultimately do have to opt into it, and they aren't forced to. And then operators, you have to determine your capacity and follow your state procedures. So I do not want you all running out today and being like, cool, this is all a done deal. Let me just go spend money on this assumption that all these things are going to happen. It's still a potential. But again, we wanted you to have a sense of what the universe of possibilities are coming at you. So with that, let's talk about the summer and what those implications are. There is the potential to operate like last summer with delivery, curbside pickup, weekly bundles, etc. Again, because there is the potential of a nationwide extension of non-congregate service, meal service time, and parent and guardian meal pickup waivers like we've had. Similarly, there is a potential to operate regardless of area eligibility because USDA has that authority to issue a meal pattern waiver. And there is also the potential of meal pattern flexibility in the seamless summer option as it's needed. Just want to note, there actually has not been a summer food service program meal pattern waiver in effect since last June. That expired last June 30th. So USDA does have the authority to issue an SFSP meal pattern waiver. Again, with all of this being a potential, just noting it may not happen. It hasn't been in effect for the past year, but it could happen. So again, a lot of potential, but the potential is for there to be operations much like you had last summer. And for the school year, we're going to spend a little bit more time here because there's a few different things to talk about. And this is where I'm going to talk about some of that reimbursement rate stuff that I mentioned. All right, so just make sure we're all on the same page. Based on what the law says, we're going to continue with this return to the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. That we were all kind of operating under that assumption, especially since March. The Keep Kids Fed Act has not changed that. So we're returning to the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program for the coming school year. That means collecting free and reduced price meal applications, unless this is a school that has elected the community eligibility provision. Likewise, it means resuming charging for meals, unless the student is eligible for free meals, of course, or unless the school has elected a non-pricing provision like CEP or Provision 2, or you're in one of the states that has universal free meals. So California, Vermont, Maine, those states are paying the difference, at least for the coming year. So students will receive meals at no cost in those states. So I know that's also an added piece of confusion that there are these differences in different states. But in most of the country, there will be a resumption of charging for meals. That said, I do want to note, even in the states that have universal free school meals, this law still matters because it means you're going to be returning to NSLP in the school breakfast program. And unless you're doing CEP, you are going to be gathering free and reduced price meal applications because those state laws require you to be leveraging the federal reimbursement. So paying attention to what the federal requirements is still really important, even in those states. It just means that students aren't going to be charged for meals. So similar to CACFP and summer, there's the potential for meal pattern flexibility. Again, potential because USDA still needs to actually issue the waiver, your state still needs to opt in, issue guidance, etc. And then there's similarly the potential for a waiver for congregate service, meal service time, parent guardian meal pickup, and other administrative requirements. In general, for the school year, it may end up working similar to it has over the past school year, where these waivers for like congregate service really end up only coming into play for things like virtual learning days or student quarantines or students being out sick. Again, we don't have the actual waivers to know exactly how it will be worded and structured. States can obviously have their own spin on these things sometimes too, but in general, my assumption is that it's not going to be a broad non-congregate service all school year long, but I think it is really important that these waivers are available as they are needed so that you do have that flexibility to pivot as it becomes necessary. I know from talking from school nutrition directors that service models can change on a dime as, you know, different school safety needs require. And so you have that flexibility possible there to be able to adapt your service model and know that you have a little bit of breathing room right there. Okay, the reimbursement rates. They're complicated. I've tried to explain this a lot of times and people ask, like, well, what is the reimbursement rate for school meals? I'm like, take a pick. There's this huge table. It really depends on a lot of different things. So these are the school meal, or the National School Lunch Program, I should say, reimbursement rates for this school year, 21-22 school year. So the NSLP reimbursement rates for the coming school year have not yet been announced. So that's an added complication. And I do want to note, again, there is this memo that came out June 15th about how to determine your eligibility for your severe need breakfast reimbursement and the 2-cent differential for school lunch, given the state of eligibility and school meals data over the past 2 years. So take a look at that memo. If you're not sure, do I qualify for the less than 60% rate or the 60% or more rate? Again, definitely adding to the complication here. But moving on to what reimbursement rates could look like over the coming year, I want to caveat, as it says here, these are estimates. The rate for the coming school year is not out yet. However, we do know that the rates for the coming year are always based on the Consumer Price Index for May, as it's released in June. So our estimate, based on what the Consumer Price Index was, is that the rates will increase by about 7.4%. So that's the middle column there, 38 cents, $3.50, $3.93. And then the Keep Kids Fed Act increases every lunch reimbursement, again, whether it's free, reduced, or paid, by 40 cents. So we estimate in this example that if you are a school in the lower 48 states that does not qualify for that 2-cent differential, you're in the less than 60% category, your reimbursements would be 78 cents for a paid lunch, $3.90 for a reduced price lunch, and $4.33 for a free lunch. Also noting, this does not include the value of USDA foods. These are just the lunch reimbursement rates. So that is what we expect reimbursements to look like for lunch in the coming school year. Again, caveating estimates. This is not the Federal Register announcement for the coming year. Okay, school breakfast. Similarly, lots of different rates. This is the full table from the Federal Register for the 21-22 reimbursement rates. So looking again, what we think those would be, looking at the Consumer Price Index for what inflation would be. So this is an example where school in the lower 48 states qualifies for the severe need reimbursement. The adjustment with CPI would be 35 cents for a paid breakfast, $2.20 for a reduced price breakfast, $2.52 for a free breakfast, and then adding that 15 cents per breakfast under the Keep Kids Fed Act, that's going to bring it up to 50 cents for a paid breakfast, $2.35 for a reduced price breakfast, and $2.67 for a free breakfast. Again, estimates, rounding can be different, all of that, but just wanted to give you a ballpark for what you might be working with over the coming year. Okay, and I know I talked a little bit about CACFP, but I want to specifically call out after school. So CACFP at risk after school, we know cannot operate during the summer vacation, but picking up with the 22-23 school year, when SFSP and seamless summer operations end, that is where CACFP at risk comes back in. there is not going to be an area eligibility waiver. So unlike the summer, where Congress gave USDA the authority to continue that if they issue that waiver, there is not that authority for CACFP at risk after school in the coming school year. That's kind of what we meant with that more limited authority. They can't do waivers that increase federal costs, and waiving area eligibility would be something that would increase federal costs because it would expand the program into more areas that wouldn't otherwise be able to operate it. However, there is the 10 extra cents per meal and snack served, and that includes at-risk after-school programs. And similar to all the other programs as we've talked about, there is the potential for meal pattern flexibility, and there is the potential for waivers for congregate service, meal service times, parent guardian meal pickup, and other administrative requirements. Okay, next steps. Where do we go from here? For operators, all of you summer operators that have already started running, all of you school nutrition staff planning for next school year, gotta wait for USDA and state agency guidance. Said it many times already, but we have to say it again. We are still waiting for those actual waivers to know what is actually going to be possible. I've just been trying to tell you what's the universe of possibilities. But I do encourage you to start thinking now about what your budget is, what your staff capacity might be, what procurement look like, and what your community needs are to think about, does it make sense to pivot? How would I be messaging this? Is it going to make sense for my staff to do non-congregate service? Could I add non-congregate sites? Could I switch a site from congregate to non-congregate? Would I even be able to get boxes and bags to package meals if all of this was possible? Please do not place a $5,000 order for to-go boxes right now based on what I said. Please check with your state agency and wait for that guidance before making those kinds of decisions. But I think it makes sense to start thinking about them now. State agencies, thank you for all the work you've done over the past 2 years. I know this is another curveball for you. And I know you've already approved a bunch of applications for summer, but please prepare to opt into these nationwide waivers. We know that they would make such a huge difference for kids and families on the ground and for operators that are struggling in many places. But consider the systems and resources that you would need to do so. And so related to that, I know we have some other state leaders, education leaders, other national partner organizations on this call. I would love for you to encourage the adoption of all available waivers once they're known, and to support state agencies and operators in that. This is not flipping a switch. A lot of things have already been put into place, planning based on the kids, Keep Kids Fed Act not being there. So additional support may be needed to really help states and help operators take advantage of the waiver flexibilities once they're announced. So it's been a team effort all along with implementation, with all of the advocacy to get this to happen. And it's still a team effort. So we stand ready to help. And we hope all of you are ready to help as well. As we know, this isn't everything we wanted. It's later than we would have wanted, but we hope that this can still help more kids get the nutrition they need for the summer and for the next school year. So with that, I have burned through all of that content, probably again, because I don't have all the answers and this is not definitive guidance and the end of the road. But again, I hope it helps you to understand what was actually in the act, what was not in the act, and what may be coming down the road, hopefully very soon. With that, I will try to look at questions that have come in through the Q&A. Kelly, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of these and want to start off.
I have, but Carolyn, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to buy you a few seconds. I want you to catch your breath. You can take a look through those questions. There are a lot in there. So if you want to take a quick peek, I do know that there was one common theme in there, seeking some clarity on area eligibility, and whether or not area eligibility has been included. So if you want to scroll through there and see those, and while you take a peek, just a note here for everyone. Again, first of all, I just want to give a huge thank you to Carolyn for running through all of that content. And then a reminder here as well to please keep putting your questions into the Q&A box. That allows us to kind of keep a record of these questions so that we can get to what we can in today's session. As a reminder, both in the interest of time and as Carolyn has explained and explained again today, based on the information we have or perhaps do not have yet. And we will continue to take stock of these questions, to share those with USDA, share them with our national partners, and then perhaps put into writing some of these answers for you to have in the future. So with that, Carolyn, you gathered your thoughts.
Okay, well, I'll tackle the area eligibility question first. And again, the law gave USDA the authority to extend that waiver. That waiver has not been issued yet. States have not decided if they are opting into that waiver. So based on how the law was written, again, we think USDA would have the power to do so. It has not happened yet. And again, that would only be for SFSP and SSO for this summer, would not apply once the new school year begins. So hopefully that clarifies it. Drop another question in the Q&A if there's some other specific element of that I have not gotten to. It does make me think one thing I do want to note, if you are looking at a site that is operating today, or that you want to have operating today or tomorrow, but isn't area eligible, or you want to have it start operating on July 1, I don't have an answer as to whether or not those meals would be reimbursed if the waiver is not out yet, if your state has not opted into it yet. So chat with your state. If you're in that situation, I cannot answer that question for you. And I don't want you to be serving meals at a site that isn't currently area eligible, and then end up not being able to get reimbursement if, again, the timing hasn't been in place, or for whatever reason, your state hasn't opted into that waiver. Again, states, please opt into those waivers. But I'm not making any guarantees right now because that guidance is not out yet. I do see a question here. First up, what are the meal patterns? So I know we have a lot of partners joining from other organizations, don't live and breathe school nutrition maybe in the same way. Important piece of clarification, especially in the school nutrition programs. There are a lot of requirements about what has to be on the plate, on the tray. Not only is it the basic food groups, but it's also a lot of requirements around whole grain rich items and different fruit and vegetables subgroups, like, are you serving some leafy green vegetables? Are you serving beans? We know those are extremely challenging to meet with these supply chain difficulties, that sometimes those leafy greens that you were planning to serve on Thursday to meet that requirement didn't show up on the truck. So the meal patterns broadly are the requirements for the meals, the nutrition standards, what the meals include, all of that. And so the law included the authority for USDA to issue waivers from those meal pattern requirements. I, again, don't have the waiver. I don't know exactly how USDA will write that, how that will be granted, what the specifics are, but broadly, Congress gave USDA the authority to issue meal pattern waivers as they're needed. Let's see.
Carolyn, I can toss you a question if you would like.
Please go.
So there's been a couple of questions coming in clarifying what I will call the reimbursement situation. So this question asks if the figures that you mentioned, the additional 40 cents per lunch and additional 15 cents for breakfast, for example, are those in addition to the federal reimbursement rates that will be announced in July?
Correct. That is my understanding, that they would be on top of the rates that are announced in July for July 1 to June 30th. So that's what I was trying to do with that very complicated slide with the different arrows and all of that, that we don't know definitively what those new reimbursement rates will be, but it is our understanding, based on how the law was written, that there will be the new rates for the new school year with an increase based on the consumer price index. And on top of that, there will be the 40 cents per lunch, 15 cents per breakfast, 10 cents for CACFP. I do also want to mention that the way that part of the law was written is not like a waiver that states would have to opt into. So that should be the default. The rates are just going to be 40 cents higher. You don't have to hope and pray that your state's going to opt into giving you that extra money. Let's see. Just glancing at a couple of other questions that I see here. Are the waivers only available to school districts or schools, or is it available to be used by nonprofits that support school systems? I would say, again, this is just based on the law, so we don't definitively have the waivers. We don't have the interpretation of how states will use them. However, with the way the law was written and the authority they give to USDA, yes, the waivers would theoretically be available to both nonprofits and schools. And again, nonprofits, whether or not they're specifically supporting school systems, or it's the YMCA serving meals at their Y, or making non-congregate meals available at their Y, or you know, a park or something like that. So yes, the authority is there for waivers to be available to nonprofits. Another question, does this allow for multiple meals to be picked up as they have in the past? Again, yes, the way the law was written, with that authority given to USDA, there is the ability for USDA to issue waivers that allow for that. That's the kind of combination of the non-congregate waiver plus the meal service time waiver that allows for those multiple meal situations. Kelly, please chime in if there's other questions that you read and you want to get to.
Will do. And just for all of you who cannot see what we see on this side, in addition to the many, many questions that came in ahead of the webinar, there are many, many questions now. So looking here for some themes, there is another question here, Carolyn, about reimbursements. And that is, will the increased reimbursements continue through the end of the school year, or will those end once the $3 billion in funds run out?
That's a good question. I believe based on how the law was written, that it is for every lunch served through the next school year. And it was just the way that Congress and the Congressional Budget Office was estimating how much this bill would cost for the purposes of offsetting that cost. It was part of the negotiation process that this bill was fully paid for without new spending. I don't think it was, here is a $3 billion budget. You can only have these flexibilities until that money's gone, if that makes sense. So I think you're good on the rates for the full next school year. You don't have to worry about an announcement in March going, oops, we have to take it away from you.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. I see another question here that I do recall you touching on a bit. If we are currently running SFSP, are we allowed to offer meals as grab and go now?
Now is an important caveat on that one. I would wait for the actual waivers to come out. I think that should be an option, but we're gonna wait for those actual USDA waivers, wait for your actual state agency guidance. The authority is there. We think it's a possibility. We think it's likely. It's not definitive yet. I'm also seeing a lot of questions in the chat about area eligibility and needing some additional clarification on that one. Let's see. So to be clear, the authority is there for USDA to issue an area eligibility waiver for this summer for SFSP and SSO. I do know it wasn't very clearly laid out in some of the summaries that came out, but our read, based on how the law was written, and our best understanding is that the authority is there for USDA to grant an area eligibility waiver for this summer. Again, hasn't been done yet, but that is our understanding of the law. I see another question that if we had a summer school that did not qualify for seamless because of their free and reduced price level was less than 50%, that they can now be seamless. Okay, so this is a good question. And not my best area of expertise of knowing those times when summer schools don't get to qualify for the summer meals programs. It's true that if there is an area eligibility waiver, that would definitely help those schools that are below 50% free and reduced, can't qualify on census data, all of that. However, it is my understanding that if there is a summer school and they are only serving summer school students and they are not open to anyone else in the community, that then regardless of their area eligibility, that they can't do SFSP and SSO and they have to do NSLP because of being that closed to students only during summer school. And in those cases, closed to students only during summer school and you're operating NSLP, that means there is not a waiver authority there for USDA to allow NSLP sites to receive SSO or SFSP rates. Again, my best understanding, we're going to wait for the USDA guidance on that, but that is what I think is going to be coming down the pike.
Carolyn, I had a question here and I lost it. The question was something along the lines of, are those increased reimbursement rates temporary for this coming school year, or are those permanent?
Temporary, very important caveat. Should have emphasized it so many more times. 1 year only through next June or the end of the school year in the case of schools operating NSLP and SBP. I do see a related question here. Is there an increase for after school snacks? So I don't believe that snacks served through NSLP would qualify for a higher rate. Based on how I read the law, it's only for lunches in NSLP, breakfast and school breakfast, and then meals and snacks through CACFP. So if you're doing snacks through NSLP, I did not see a higher reimbursement for those. Would love to be proven wrong. This is my best read of the law.
Carolyn, I'm going to toss you this question, and I want to acknowledge in advance that you might not have the answer. Do you have any idea what the opt-in process will look like for states?
I do not. It's going to vary.
Great. Moving to the next question. Let's see all. We're still with y'all. We're just reading.
So many questions. We're doing our best. Will summer feeding include weekends? I think that's a great question. Normally during the summer, under usual SFSP and SSO rules, you can serve meals on the weekends. So that is always in effect and that can continue. And then however the waivers end up working out, you would be able to apply those waiver flexibilities to weekends as well.
Carolyn, I just saw a question come in actually in the chat box, and I'm going to read this one to you. It says, do you think it is possible that Congress will pass another bill around this issue before next school year to extend universal school meals?
Can you read that again, please?
Yes. Do you think it is possible that Congress will pass another bill around this issue before the next school year to extend universal school meals?
I think anything can be possible. In some respects, Keep Kids Fed Act surprised me. We certainly want to keep lifting up the needs that you have. So please, let us know, again, those specifics of how this would really help you, how this is really necessary to your operations, how that finance piece is going to work for you. And we will continue lifting up those stories. I don't want to say it's impossible. I don't want you to feel like it's a given either. I see a question in the chat I want to address, or in the Q&A box. Do states have the authority to grant non-congregate waivers for issues not related to a COVID outbreak? This is a great question. Having not seen the actual waiver language yet, I don't know for sure. However, it is my understanding from how the law was written that this does broaden the option for non-congregate waivers than what we've seen with the guidance that USDA has put out to states about those state requested waivers. So we are hopeful that this will allow for a little more clarity and a little more confidence in using a non-congregate waiver than we've seen with the state requested waiver process. So not definitive, but I do think that the way Congress gave USDA that authority for the summer, especially with that ability to do waivers that have a cost even, I think it really broadens that out. Okay. Still just reading questions.
And again, just reiterating while Carolyn looks through those questions, that if there are things we're not able to get to today, we will continue looking through these questions to pass them along to USDA, and also to consider how, once that guidance does come out from USDA, how we can put some more of this information into writing for you all. And then perhaps if there's interest in having another webinar, we can do that. I also, sorry, looking at the chat coming in, also do welcome your recommendations and requests in the chat box right now. We at No Kid Hungry are always doing our best to anticipate needs and figure out how to best get you all information. So if you have preferences and how we can best support you all, welcome those recommendations now. Do you like having webinars? Do you prefer getting emails from us? Do you like resources? That's feedback that we always welcome. So please go ahead and let us know in the chat because today is not the last day that you will hear from us. Carolyn, you ready for some more?
Go for it.
Let's see what we have here. Okay, we've kind of touched upon this in some regards, and again, might not know for sure yet. Do you know if this will allow for multiple meals to be picked up as they have been allowed in the past?
I believe so. That again, with the authority to do a non-congregate and a meal service time waiver, that should follow that you could do multiple meals at one time. I think again, especially looking towards the school year, there may be caveats around it that's generally only expected if we are in a situation of virtual learning or quarantines or sick kids or closure or things like that. But broadly, I think that the authority is there for USDA and states to make those options possible.
And I will just, Carolyn, I will give you a moment to look at the chat box and the question and answer box, and I will voice over here in the chat box. You all will now receive communications from the No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices. So we will continue sharing with you all information as it becomes available. So as I'm seeing here, of course, a mix of preferences for those of you that like getting information in writing and those of you that prefer webinars. We will continue doing our best to bring you a variety of those things. We recognize there is no such thing as too much communication these days with so much important information to relay.
I do see a good question in the Q&A to address. As an SFSP provider, would we be able to run a combination of congregate meal sites and grab and go sites? So again, pending those actual waivers and pending your state guidance allowing a grab and go site, I do think that would be possible. I don't think you're going to have to choose at a sponsor level whether you're doing one or the other. So I think you can definitely decide, hey, we've got a camp, we've got a program, we've got a park, we've got a school where it makes sense to do congregate meals. But we also have these other places that we know we're not reaching for, whatever reason of these families don't feel safe coming to sites this summer, or these kids are quarantining. These kids are just going to get missed because of transportation and supply issues that they can't, be served otherwise at our congregate sites. I think that should be permitted. So I think that's a great question, something that we would love to see, but I hope you're considering those options and knowing that I don't think you should have to pick and choose. But again, as with all of this, we're going to be waiting on that specific guidance. Another question I see about, will funding be retroactive for meals that did not qualify previously? Again, can't answer that question. And this is related to other questions about when we can expect that USDA guidance. Know that USDA is working furiously. They just can't do this on a dime. There are approval processes that they have to follow, boxes they have to check. So they are working on all of that. But they do know that time is of the essence and they're trying to get that out as fast as possible. At this time, I do not know that if the funding pieces would necessarily be retroactive if the waivers don't come out until July 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and your state doesn't opt in until 3rd, 4th, 5th, or beyond. I can see this. No, I just don't even want to comment on this. I don't want to guarantee it. Fingers crossed, we'll see what they do. Hopefully this all comes as soon as possible. I can't make a comment on that though.
Okay. Carolyn asked if we want to pick out maybe one or two more questions here in the interest of time. And then again, a reminder for everyone, we will have all of these questions captured and we will go back and look to see what came in here. We will share those with others and we will also look through to see what more we can do to help you answer them either now or when that additional information and guidance is available.
Okay.
Actually, here, Carolyn, I'm gonna send you this one because I think we have an answer here. And the
Okay.
question is there any waiver authority extension for the school breakfast program?
Yes, that authority is there for the National School Lunch Program, along with CACFP for the coming school year. There is, again, that more limited authority. So again, if there's a non-congregate waiver that applies to NSLP, it's going to apply to the school breakfast program as well. So don't worry, it's not lunch only, it would be lunch and breakfast. I feel like I may have caused some confusion in my comments around summer schools. In general, closed SSO sites are allowed and are a thing. Again, I just want to have that caveat that I know that there are situations when schools have to operate NSLP during the summer because of the way they're operating. So if you're allowed to be a closed SSO site, then you're probably going to be allowed to continue as a closed SSO site. I'm just saying that if you are required to operate through NSLP this summer, then you would not have broad nationwide waiver authority that allows you to get the SFSP rate for an NSLP meal this summer. So let's all wait for the guidance to come out. But if you're a closed SSO site, you can probably stay a closed SSO site. Yeah. Any other final questions or thoughts we want to try to get to in 2 minutes?
Yes, what I would recommend you all, as I have been saying, and hopefully I'm not too much of a broken record yet, I would encourage the attendees that are still with us, if you can put in the questions that you still have into the Q&A box in the last 2 minutes that we are live on this webinar. Again, as I've been sharing, that will help us just capture those for future answering when we are able to send follow-up information once we have that additional guidance from USDA. So we welcome you to put those questions in there. And what I will then also conclude with, it has been a popular question here today. You will get the recording of today's webinar along with the slide deck. That sometimes takes a little while to process and download, so that may be available today. If not, I imagine tomorrow might be more realistic, but you will get that email to you. If there is any reason why that somehow does not land in your inbox, I will go ahead here and type my email address for you. So you can say, hey, Kelly, where is what you promised us? But you should receive that follow-up communication from our Center for Best Practices account. With that, I'm going to give you all a few more seconds to go ahead and add your questions in there for future answering. I just want to, again, give a big thank you for all of you for joining us today. We do hope this was a helpful session for you. Carolyn, again, I want to give you a big thank you for walking us through this explanation and really carrying the weight of this webinar. And before we close it out, I wanted to see if you wanted to close out with any final words of your own.
I just want to say a big thank you to all of you who were part of the advocacy push to make this happen. I again acknowledge it wasn't exactly everything we wanted. It was later than we wanted, but I do hope it helps to give you a little bit of breathing room and it helps to reach some more kids. So thank you for all that you did to help make this possible. Thank you for all that you do to feed kids. It is such critical work. You are the ones making it happen. So we're happy to be here supporting you now and as we move forward and get more information.
Awesome. And I'll add, if this is your first No Kid Hungry webinar, because every webinar is somebody's first webinar, we certainly hope you'll join us again in the future. We will be in touch as more information becomes available. Until then, wishing you all a great rest of your day and hopefully a long holiday weekend coming up. And we're all in this together. So best of luck to all of us as we figure out and navigate next steps. Bye, everybody.